The Halo CE 1749 beta, Bungie's internal pre-release demo of Halo Combat Evolved. Presumably given only to playtesters, this build is dated for August 15th, 2001, exactly 3 months before the final Xbox release would hit store shelves. And now, 23 years later, I ported this obscure gem to the Master Chief Collection, and I couldn't be more excited to show you what's in store. This build is chock full of cut concepts and experimental mechanics that you just can't find anywhere else. Like Keys not actually knowing how to fly a spirit dropship, or shotguns appearing in the first few levels. I was able to port almost everything. The weapons, the AI, the difficulty, oh my god, the difficulty. Even the multiplayer, which still has that classic Halo feel, just with a bit more jank. It's all made fully available on the Steam Workshop. You can play it right now, in fact. And should you not have the Master Chief Collection on Steam, or you just want to poke around the level tags to maybe incorporate some of it into your own mods, I am including the modded maps and all accompanying data over on Nexus mods. Anyway, there is a lot I'd like to cover with this build. Despite being only 3 months from prime time, this build is way more unfinished than you might think. Everything from models to cutscenes to certain lighting effects are just plain janky. So what I'm really trying to say is, strap in, because this beta rabbit hole, it gets pretty deep. Let's just jump into this fever dream of a CE build. The most natural starting place is what I'm sure you're all here to see, the single player campaign. The 1749 beta features the full complement of 10 missions you know and love from the base game. But already from the main menu alone, we can spot 2 differences just from the level select screen. The first is that Assault on the Control Room was originally called Fortress World. Nothing else is really different aside from the name, level still plays out relatively similar. And the next is the level description on Keys. It gets right to the point, instead reading "Bring back the head of Captain Keys." Pretty much gives away right from the start what befell the old captain. It's fine, we can fix it! There's even some unused dialogue fully confirming this at the start of the mission.
I can read the captain's CNI transponder. He's in the control room. But I'm not detecting any human life signs.
But that's just the level selection, a couple text changes, maybe some dialogue here and there. I mean, really, given that they realistically only had around 2 months from here to fully finish this game, surely the levels and really the game itself can't be all that different. Well.
Whoa, a Mark 5! We're in a bad way. We've got wounded here.
I'll call in a dropship to pick them up. Never been better. You can't imagine the wealth of information.
Jenkins! Mendoza, move it up!
Greetings. I am the monitor of Installation 04. I am 342 Guilty Spark.
Please follow me to the energy shield test station.
Yeah, it's pretty different. Yeah, so there's a lot. There's big changes like all the Covenants speaking English.
Show me what you got.
But then there's also the little things, like shotguns in the early game, which you might think, wow, that's a little OP, but it's actually not. There's many reasons why, which I'll get into a bit later, but the SparkNotes version is the shotgun shoots a lot slower, does slightly less damage, and Chief is about as brittle as a 5'3" YouTuber. Nah, that's just cold. It's pretty good on normal though, but it's f***ing normal. There's just so many layers to this build, and it's near impossible to completely cover it all in a reasonable amount of time. So instead, I'd like to give you just a taste of some of the things you will experience in this build. Let's talk through some of my personal favorites and also just stuff that was surprising. Kicking it off, we'll start with some general non-level specific changes. First, we have the in-game models for the Blue Elites and the Armored Marines. Something really cool that 1749 introduced was this idea of dynamic armor. Specifically, the shoulder guards or the thigh guards for both the Marines and the Elites could just be non-existent. This leads to a lot of variety with what you encounter with these specific characters. It's my favorite idea from this build and one I really wish they kept in for the final game. And as many of you on Twitter aptly pointed out, yes, the Elite is not wearing pants. Staying on the topic of models, I do also need to talk about the monitor, 343 Guilty Spark. No, wait.
I am 342 Guilty Spark.
Right, yeah, if you didn't know, there was a typo in the voice actor's script causing him to say 342 Guilty Spark. This was fixed in post sometime after this build. Anyway, old Sparky has some interesting effects. Very clear they were still working out what to do with them. He has these electric sparks that just jut out in front of his face continuously. Are you okay, man?
Yeah, man, I'm all good.
His sentinels also make some interesting sounds. The sound effects they use is like a Star Trek transporter or something. Next up, we have the plasma grenades, and I'll just let this one speak for itself. A lit plasma grenade generates these unstable electric sparks that shoot out from the center, and the resulting explosion has a much more saturated greenish tint to it. Now, while these effects are very pretty, be very careful where you throw them. Yeah, so here's another big change that's very easy to miss. In retail, static objects like the grenades at the start of Halo cannot explode or be moved regardless if you throw a plasma, a frag, shoot a rocket at it, doesn't do anything. However, in 1749, this wasn't yet a thing, so every single grenade or object you see on the ground will chain react or get launched, whatever the case may be. As for the weapons, there's a lot of little nuances that I'd like to cover here briefly. For example, the shotgun I mentioned earlier, it shoots a lot slower in this build compared to retail, 25% slower in fact. Same with the shotgun's melee too. Speaking of nerfs, the plasma pistol is also slightly nerfed in this build too, though not damage-wise, rather with its ammo usage. A plasma pistol overcharge in this build takes double the ammo compared to retail, a whole 22% instead of just 11. Then there's the needler, which is actually a lot stronger in this build. In the base game, the rate of fire started very slow, then worked itself up to the max speed. However, in 1749, the needler just starts shooting at max speed. This actually makes it very useful for taking out enemies from afar, which is very important on the higher difficulties. We also have the plasma rifle, which balance-wise is pretty much the same, but its model features multiple green dots on the left side where the heat gauge used to be. These dots actually act as an ammo counter. They slowly fade out as your ammo gets lower and lower. And finally, I have to talk about the flamethrower. Yes, the flamethrower was actually present in 1749 campaign missions organically, though it's definitely very unfinished. It's extremely hard to use. You have to be quite a ways in front of an enemy before its hits even register, and even then, it's honestly just pretty bad. Just hold on, it'll get him eventually! But the flamethrower is cool in that it has completely unique HUD elements never seen anywhere else. Essentially a giant blue bar with a flame icon next to it representing your current ammo. There's also some meters on the model itself that serve as an additional ammo counter and other such things. Perhaps the most unique thing about this version of the flamethrower is that if you kill an enemy with it, they'll run around screaming for a second before finally dying. I presume this is supposed to represent them being on fire. Now, moving on to the vehicles of 1749, they have much more janky physics to them. Like for example, the tank is ridiculously fast, the Warthog generates a lot of sparks on metallic surfaces, and as for the Covenant shade turrets, holy sh**, it shoots ridiculously fast. I did not speed up this video at all, I swear, it's just this fast. There's also an overheat gauge towards the top left that ultimately goes unused, which is an interesting concept, especially given it shoots this fast. Probably would burn out right away. Now, I do also want to talk about what you can expect from the actual levels of 1749. First, I do want to point out that there are some cutscenes in this build, but the ones that are here are very janky. Animations are super stiff, the pacing is all over the place, and there's some bugs where sequences don't play out correctly. Like, for example, there's the AOTCR ending cutscene where you spend half of it staring at Cortana's ass.
This ring isn't a cudgel, you barbarian. It's something else. Something much more important.
It's all just kinda janky and unfinished. The cutscene designers had quite a lot of work ahead of them to finish the cutscenes that are here, not even to speak of all the missing cutscenes, of which there's a lot more than you might think. In 1749, if the game tries to play a cutscene that wasn't yet finished, you'll instead get what's called a stubbed placeholder. Basically, you'll get black bars and be unable to move for a few seconds before they recede and you can continue. Just serves as a developer marker for insert cutscene here. Playing through, these placeholders are in the spots you'd expect expect, like the keys cutscene for example. However, there is one placeholder that hints at a cutscene that was ultimately cut. On Truth and Reconciliation, there's a placeholder cutscene right before the two hunters drop down after clearing out the gravity lift. This means they originally were going to have a cutscene of some kind there showing the hunters coming down in a cinematic way. Next, I have to talk about all the unused dialogue. There's so much of it scattered across the game, most notably at the start of Truth and Reconciliation.
Touchdown in 10 seconds, people. We're in Covenant territory now. All ground troops are clear of the ramps, pilot. We'll radio for resupply when we're inside the Covenant ship.
There's an entire conversation that plays out between Foehammer, Cortana, and the Marines that just doesn't exist to nearly the same extent. There's little nuggets like this scattered all around, like completely different Cortana takes at the start of Halo.
I warned the captain that this wasn't a good idea. I should never have left the Pillar of Autumn. You're awake. Can you move?
Make sure to keep an eye out for all of these, there's a lot of them. Next, I do need to talk about 1749's lighting. Multiple levels had sections where they never generated proper light maps. This resulted in very janky looking lighting with flat textures and extremely unusual shading. Unfortunately, this lack of light maps is not expressed well at all in MCC. I mean, it looks like a fucking flashbang. This makes certain cutscenes and other areas just plain miserable to look at.
It's all good, I got this.
Took a bit of doing, but I actually got MCC to render light maps that look pretty close to how 1749 did it. It's not perfect by any means, but it's a lot closer than I was expecting to get and should still give you that impression that the lighting was never quite right. The other sections though, the ones where they did generate proper lighting, oh my god, this is the best that this game has ever looked. The lighting just feels so much more vibrant and alive. The use of color and directional lights really brings out the depth and detail of these maps. Honestly, much of 1749 looks like the Halo CE remaster we've always wanted. It just looks so good, especially on MCC. Make sure you take the time to soak it all in as you play through. And last, but certainly not least, I'd like to talk about Easter eggs. Unfortunately, 1749 does not feature the many Easter eggs we know and love in the retail build. No thirsty grunts, wrecks, or other fun things. However, there is a special death sequence on POA that I personally consider an Easter egg. It's very easy to miss and unique to this build alone. In 1749, the blast doors on the other side of the crouch tutorial have a very short window where you can jump through them before they completely close. This isn't a soft lock either, quite the opposite in fact. The devs hid a secret death scene in here. Everything in the room starts slowly exploding until suddenly you're reverted back to your last checkpoint, implying that the very last explosion just instantly killed you. It's very cool and also very easy to miss. There's only a short window, so make sure to give it a shot. Now I'd like to talk about the overall balance of 1749, specifically the difficulty and the way the AI behaves. First is the most obvious difference when selecting a level in the OG 1749. There's only 3 difficulties: normal, heroic, and legendary. I assume easy was added a bit later to ensure the game was still completable by anyone forced to hold this fucking thing.
It's more home defense than it is controller.
Normal will feel very similar to the retail game, enemy health, damage, and AI adjustments using mostly the same scalings. There are a few key differences you'll want to be aware of, however. First, enemies will notice and react to you much faster in this build when compared to retail. They're lightning quick and much harder to sneak up on. Another difference is elites will act much more aggressively with regard to their ability to berserk. When they berserk, they let out a loud roar.
Come on, make my day.
This causes them to chase you all around the map with maximum aggression. To cause a berserk in the retail build, you'd normally need to bring their health down to a very low point, making this much less of an issue since it was more of a last-ditch attempt. But in 1749, it's also proximity based. Move too close to an elite and no matter their health, they'll berserk.
Show me what you got.
It's just wrong, man. It's just wrong.
This is quite dangerous if you have something like an elite major with full health and shields, so just keep that in mind. Oh, and grunts also have the ability to overcharge you. Bit of a shock when it first happens. Far and wide, however, the most significant difference for all difficulties is that there's very little in the way of health and ammo pickups. This essentially means that whatever you start with is probably all you're gonna get. You'll like maybe get a health pack here and there, but a proper ammo drop, yeah, you don't get very many of those. And that's pretty much the main differences that impact the normal difficulty. Other than those, it's pretty standard fare. The same cannot be said about the higher difficulties, however. I'll tell it to you straight. This build is f***ing hard. I'm telling you this as someone who speedruns this dog shit. game, okay? I know things, and I have the science to prove it. Let's just for a moment ignore the fact that higher difficulties spawn like 3 times the amount of enemies. What the fuck? And let's also just ignore the lack of health and ammo pickups literally anywhere. It's fine, it's just a flesh wound! Let's instead dig into the real reason why this build is so difficult. To do this, let's first look at the base game. You may or may not have noticed that when you nade yourself on higher difficulties, you seem to take less damage compared to a lower difficulty. Common sense probably told you this is because your grenades do less damage on higher difficulties. But actually no, that's not what's happening here. On higher difficulties, your grenades will do less damage against enemies for sure, but this scaling does not apply when you specifically nade yourself. It does the same amount of damage regardless. So then what's the real reason you seemingly take less damage on Legendary?
Look, this is a legit business.
Well, here's where the Bungie Fudge Factor comes in. You have a lot more health and shield strength on Legendary than you do on Easy. Yes, I'm serious. You see, Bungie likely realized during playtesting that higher difficulties were a bit overtuned. Increased AI aggression and accuracy combined with the weapon balancing was just way too tough for an average player to handle, especially with this thing. And this is precisely why 1749 is so difficult by comparison. This health and shield difficulty fudge factor did not exist in this build, meaning you have 20% less health and shields on heroic and a whole whopping 40% less health and shields on legendary than you would in the retail build. And when you combine all this with the more aggressive and alert AI of 1749, holy shit, these enemies will melt you. The legendary difficulty in particular was not fully balanced for each level yet. In other words, legendary has a ridiculous amount of enemies in certain sections. This lack of proper level balance is most apparent at the start of 2 Betrayals. Okay, check this. You get an assault rifle and a shotgun to start in this build. You might remember 2 Betrayals, we have sentinels to fight at the beginning. Neither of these weapons are particularly effective against sentinels. Okay, I mean, that's not great, but we only got 4 sentinels to kill. It's not that bad. Oh yes, they also doubled the amount of sentinels here on Legendary. Like really guys, like what do you want me to do here? So yeah, anyway, no warranty on these difficulties. Pick at your own peril. I recommend normal for your first playthrough, or maybe heroic if you're feeling a little spicy, to really experience the full jank of this beta build. If afterwards you really want to do a playthrough on Legendary, please stream it on Twitch and send me the link. I could use something to watch in the afternoons. So anyway, now that you've been properly warned, I'd like to close out the campaign discussion with some noteworthy differences between my 1749 MCC port and the original build. 1749 notoriously was not completable without using cheats. Certain levels were just bugged and locked you out of progressing further due to certain scripting errors. The original 1749 build had softlocks on 4 separate levels: the Pillar of Autumn, Truth and Reconciliation, 2 Betrayals, and the Maw. First up, we have the Pillar of Autumn, the very first level. Yeah, without cheats or a completed save file, you weren't getting very far in the original version. Once you arrive at the life pod section, there's some doors that will open up to the maintenance access bay. On normal, this section serves as the motion sensor tutorial, the idea being you move to each red door until eventually Cortana tells you it's safe and opens it up for you. The problem is, on the original 1749, Cortana definitely tries to open up the door, but it doesn't get very far. With all the other options locked, this is effectively game over. On Heroic and Legendary, there is no motion sensor tutorial, so these maintenance doors are all supposed to be open by default, except they weren't, so this was also a game over. This was all due to a scripting error in the level's code. Fortunately, this was easily fixable. Now the red maintenance door will be properly opened by Cortana on normal, and all maintenance doors will be unlocked by default on Heroic and Legendary. The next soft lock occurs on Truth and Reconciliation, which is actually a 2-parter. The first soft lock occurs after rescuing keys from the prison area. The developers forgot to properly spawn in keys after the cutscene ends. This causes the game to think Keys is dead, resulting in an infinite game over loop.
No! The captain.
Anyway, this is now fixed. Keys' AI model will now properly spawn in after the cutscene.
No!
Yeah, that's definitely Keys. But that's not the end of softlocks on this level. After escorting Keys to the ending cutscene area, due to an error in the tags, the button to release the spirit is not actually pressable. Once again, this was fortunately an easy fix. The level will now play out like normal, but do note that the release button is not actually on the second floor.
Yes, Captain. There's a Covenant dropship still docked, and the docking clamp controls are on the 2nd floor. We need to get down there and deactivate.
Next up, we have 2 betrayals. After triggering the 3rd and final pulse generator, nothing happens. You still get the same screen effect, but the level never ends. This was another pesky scripting error where the game didn't properly recognize the pulse generator objective being complete. This error is now fixed and the level ends. And last, but certainly not least, we have the Maw, and this one was quite funny. So Halo CE uses something called a fall timer. Essentially, if you're falling for too long, the game just flat out kills you in midair. The retail build has this fall timer set to 16.5 units. However, 1749 has this set to 15 units.
Turns out that makes a big difference.
You might recall this big old drop towards the end. Yeah, when they originally made the Warthog run, they didn't properly take into account the fall timer. Rather than raise the drop, which would take reworking geometry, textures, time they didn't really have, they just upped the fall timer by a couple units and called it a day. I went ahead and applied that same exact fix in the port, so now you won't die on the big drop. Phew, and that's the Halo 1749 beta fully ported and working in MCC, and I'm so happy to finally unveil this massive project. As I said earlier, I was also able to port over the multiplayer too, and it's fully bundled with the mod itself. The multiplayer maps are pretty fun too, utilizing a lot of 1749 specific concepts, like plasma weapons staggering you and forcing you to slow down, or in some cases be unable to aim effectively. Makes them kinda OP in a way and really shakes up the weapon balancing. Please enjoy this fully working 1749 multiplayer. It's janky, but honestly a ton of fun if you don't take it too seriously. And also, don't forget to enjoy the co-op campaign mode if you'd rather experience all this with a friend. It's at this point I'd now like to give some shoutouts to a few individuals without which this mod would not have been possible. First and foremost, I need to shout out Vengeful Vadam. His 1749 analysis videos were absolutely crucial to my testing and various bug fixes. He was also kind enough to lend his vast modding expertise, answering multiple questions about CE's mod tools and also pointing me to several resources and other experts. Secondly, I'd like to shout out the modder Silicon Master for helping me out with 1749's lighting. What they helped me put together wound up being a very close replication of what 1749 did. Honestly, it got a lot closer than I would ever have expected. Next, huge shout outs to the Invader developers. Invader is a tool that extracts data called tags from Halo map files. This enabled me to have a realistic starting point for this port and also served as my primary editing tool to get all this cool stuff working in the MCC engine. Without this tool, this mod would not have been possible. And last, but certainly not least, I need to shout out Helpless7. He's actually the entire reason this mod exists. He sent me a message quite a while ago with 1749 maps asking if it were possible to port them to MCC. Well, I'm happy to say after quite a bit of work, yes, it's very possible. Helpless also helped me to get the original 1749 on my Xbox for comparison testing and also helped out with general tests on the mod, pointing out several differences that he noticed. He's also a super slick Halo CE speedrunner if you didn't know. And as for what's next, well, if you didn't know, I'm currently working on restoring all the cut content in Halo Combat Evolved. I've done videos on this restoration for both Silent Cartographer and 343 Guilty Spark, links down below, and now with a fully working build of 1749 on MCC, I have even more access to an incredible amount of unused dialogue, encounters, and models.
All is to say, lots of good things on the horizon, so make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it all. Now if you'll excuse me for a second.